Logic is the study of good arguments. And in ordinary language, this means arguments that the conclusion follows or is supported by the premises, and the premises themselves are well supported. So we're going to study two types of arguments in this course: inductive arguments and deductive arguments. But let's just first define what an argument is. An argument is a series of statements, one of which, the conclusion, is supported by the others, which are the premises. So what distinguishes an argument is the relationship of support between the different types of sentences. They give the premises give you reasons to believe the conclusion. Now, what makes an argument a good argument varies between the two types of arguments that the course is going to cover. A deductive argument is one in which the conclusion follows necessarily from the premises. That means if you accept the premises as true, you have to accept the conclusion, or else you're contradicting yourself. Okay, so on your handout, the deductive argument at the bottom, all dogs have 4 legs, first premise. Ginger is a dog. It follows necessarily from those 2 sentences that Ginger has 4 legs. That's a deductive argument. The word valid applies only to deductive arguments. An argument is valid, that would be deductive argument, when the conclusion follows necessarily from the premises. When we get to the study of deductive arguments at the end of the course, you'll see that the reason why the ones that are valid, it's because of the structure of the argument. The argument that I just provided, all dogs have 4 legs. Ginger is a dog. Ginger has 4 legs. That could be structured in the form of all A, dogs, are B, 4-legged. M, Ginger, is a dog. M, Ginger, is 4-legged. So based on accepting those premises and based on the meaning of all, some, as appears in categorical syllogisms, which we'll cover at the end of the semester, this conclusion is part of a valid argument because the conclusion follows necessarily. Now, an inductive argument is one in which the conclusion follows at best with high probability. Let me give you an example of an inductive argument. Every dog I've ever seen has 4 legs. My conclusion, all dogs have 4 legs. So that can't follow necessarily because the sample size is so small. It's limited to the dogs I've seen. Okay, we're going to talk about something besides dogs in this class, but a few more definitions. Okay, so an argument is valid if the conclusion follows necessarily, and it's sound if all the premises themselves are true or well supported. In my argument, my deductive argument, all dogs have 4 legs, that's not true because there are dogs without all 4 of their limbs. Okay, and the inductive argument, which concludes that they all have 4 legs, is not a good argument because the sample size is too small. That's why it doesn't follow even with high probability. The premises are dubious. Okay, so we've got the premises, meaning the statements that support the conclusion, and the conclusion is the destination of the argument. It's based on the reasons provided in the premises supporting that conclusion. In contrast, assumptions are the unstated premises behind an argument. Let me give you an example of an argument, and I'll introduce another logical concept, that is the warrant. It comes from legal terminology, but it has a definition in logic. Okay, if you look at your handout, there's 4 sentences. Number 1, John's not a good teacher. Number 2, he doesn't listen to his student. Number 3, he's arrogant and offensive. And number 4, he's hard to understand. Well, you can figure out that the first statement, John's not a good teacher, is the conclusion. But there's a missing premise. I'm calling it a warrant. A missing premise that provides an implied definition or description of what a good teacher is. I'm calling that the warrant. Let's add the warrant. All good teachers are teachers who listen to their students, who are not arrogant or offensive, and who are not hard to understand. Once you've added that generalization, that warrant, as a definition of what it means to be a good teacher, the conclusion follows. All teachers are, according to the argument, based on listening, not being arrogant, and easy to understand. The conclusion follows necessarily because I've provided a generalization about good teachers. Now, the point of my example is not just how do you change an inductive argument like the one on your handout into a deductive one where I've added the warrant and now the conclusion follows necessarily. The point of that exercise or that discussion about the warrant is that once you lay out the missing assumptions, such as the missing generalizations or definitions, you can see what's the flaw in the argument. It's a questionable assumption. Is all that you have to be to qualify as a good teacher those 3 characteristics? Obviously not, because you could be a good listener, not arrogant and clear, but you haven't said anything that's relevant or accurate or important to the subject matter. In other words, the students haven't learned anything. So how could you be a good teacher? Again, the point of the exercise that I just did about finding the warrant is to show you that arguments contain missing premises, and we call them assumptions. Now, arguments would never end if you examined all the missing assumptions. For example, it's not worth our trouble to question whether John is really a teacher. He may be a maintenance man that's impersonating a teacher, or he may be an alien, or he may be a robot. None of these are worth examining. The main premise that's worth examining, the main assumption, is the qualifications that make a good teacher. Okay, so now we know that the conclusion, if you're looking at a series of statements, we know that the conclusion is the one that's supported by the premises. However, in a terrible argument where the premises are implausible and hardly support the conclusion, you may not be able to distinguish between the premises and the conclusion. That's why logic books, including the 2 that you will be reading for the course, provide a list of what they call either cue indicators or key indicator words. These are words that suggest a premise, since, because, for the reason that, for the matter that, on the grounds that, and then conclusions are typically prefaced in more formal arguments. Consequently, so, therefore, thus, it follows that. So in doing your logic assignments, please consider the placement of such cue indicator words. Now, they don't always, all of them don't always indicate a premise. For example, the word since has another meaning. For example, I've been tired since 1999. That doesn't indicate a premise. Okay, but it's a correct usage of the word since. Okay, you don't see any key indicator words? You can't figure out which statements support which statements? Some logic books provide the following method for determining what the premises are and the conclusion. Again, check out your handout. Those three sentences: you should have come to the party, you said you would, you should always do what you said you would do. Ask yourself if the statement you think is the conclusion is true and the others are false. That's not likely to be the conclusion, because an argument provides reasons that you believe in the premises as a basis for supporting the conclusion. Okay, so the conclusion of that argument is the first sentence. You should have come to the party. Now, what if you thought the conclusion was you said you would? Well, can that be true and the others false? Importantly, what kind of information, what premises would support the statement you said you would come to the party? Well, if you deny that you said that, then I would report the event of your texting me that information, telling it to me on the phone or in person, or communicating in some way. Those types of observation statements support a conclusion like you said you would, when that's up for grabs. Similarly, you should always do what you said you would do. That statement doesn't necessarily follow from those other two statements. Okay, why not? A statement like you should always do what you said you were going to do is better supported by not just a reportive statement that you said you would, or a statement with the word should, it would be good if you came to the party. That kind of statement is best supported by generalizations about people, such that if they don't do what they said they're going to do, our world would be less predictable, less reliable, and in general, people would be less trustworthy. Those type of statements support an ethical claim using the word should. You should always do what you said you're going to do. Okay, so we've got a difference between inductive arguments and deductive arguments. The next portion, or the first portion of the class, is basically dealing with trying to figure out what are the missing parts of arguments and trying to figure out whether the conclusion is adequately supported by them. And then we'll begin our study of fallacies in argument. At the end of the course, I'm going to conduct the study of deductive arguments. There'll be basically two kinds. Propositional arguments have the structure if A, first sentence, then B, second sentence or proposition. A, the first statement is true, therefore B, the second statement is true. Example, if you're decapitated, you're dead. A is true, you are decapitated. The conclusion follows, you're dead. All arguments with that structure, if A then B, A therefore B, will be valid. Similarly, we're going to look at categorical syllogisms. All A, all dogs, are B, mammals. All mammals, B, are warm-blooded, C. It follows necessarily based on the word all and the position of the class in the specific statements that all dogs are warm-blooded. Okay, so I think you understand what an argument is, but there are certain other types of discourse that it would be good to clarify that may seem like arguments, but are some other type of communication. For example, an explanation. The difference between an argument and an explanation is that in an explanation, you're not trying to prove something is true. You're trying to provide the reasons why it's true. For example, if I said to my class, I'm late for class because I lost track of time, you already know I walked in late. So I'm not trying to prove that I'm late. I'm just giving you the reasons why. Although, in another context, it could function as an argument. I'm late whenever I lose track of time. And then, if you didn't know I was late, every time I lose track of time, I'm late. I lost track of time today, that's why I'm late. Okay, so an explanation typically isn't an argument, but you need to know the context of the statement that's being explained. Descriptions aren't arguments. They provide statements about certain qualities, conditions, features of persons, places, and things. And they're not arguments if none of the descriptive sentences give you a reason to believe another one. Narratives are stories, and they're accounts that provide coherence in a series of events. And finally, illustrations don't qualify as arguments because they provide applications that clarify the meaning of a word or statement. So if I claim somebody is one crazy guy, I give an example. That guy thinks he's Jesus Christ. You already know the general meaning of crazy. Now you know how he qualifies as being crazy. So those are the basic definitions that provide the introduction to our study of logic.